One photograph, black and white, a line out the door at 320 West Main Street, Rochester, New York. Shift workers, college kids, cops, drunks, insomniacs, pressed together on a sidewalk at 1 a.m, waiting for a plate of food that costs less than a gallon of gas. The year doesn't matter. It could be 1974, it could be 1998, it could be last week. The line looks the same, the plate looks the same, the building looks the same. That's the point. For over 100 years, one restaurant held the soul of an entire American city in a styrofoam container. Nick Tahou's Hots, Rochester's factory floor for food, a single flat-top grill producing a dish so dominant, so embedded in the civic bloodstream that generations of Rochesterians used it as a litmus test for belonging. You eat the plate, you're one of us. You don't, you're visiting. The dish had its own trademark, its own mythology, its own gravitational pull, strong enough to draw national food shows, travel magazines, and 2 million YouTube clicks from people who had never set foot in Western New York. One family, one grill, one name. Over a century of survival through depressions, recessions, factory closures, and the slow death of the industrial city that built it. This should have been the restaurant that outlived everything, but it didn't. The line thinned. The building went up for sale. The family fractured into 2 restaurants carrying different names. And the most famous plate in Rochester, a dish so iconic that competitors couldn't legally use its name, sat on a counter waiting for orders that came slower every year. 100 years of dominance, then a generation of silence. All of it happening without a single headline that said closed. Here's what didn't kill it. Not a health scandal, not a viral disaster, not a competitor who built a better plate, not a single catastrophic decision made by a single person on a single afternoon. Every obvious explanation you'd reach for, bad food, bad management, bad luck, is wrong. Listen, you hear that? That sharp, wet hiss. Onions hitting a flat-top grill at 400 degrees, the sizzle that built Rochester. That sound has been continuous in this building since before your grandparents were born. A spatula scrapes underneath, metal on carbon-seasoned steel, and the sound is so specific to this place that half of Rochester would recognize it blindfolded. That sizzle is a machine, an engine, a factory sound, and one day the factory started running with no one on the floor. How does a dish that survived a century of change get crushed by the city that loved it? How does a trademark designed to protect a name end up trapping the family that filed it? And how does an entire city watch its most famous restaurant fade, defending it in every conversation, showing up in none? The answer isn't scandal, it's structure. A quiet, invisible architecture of ownership, identity and place that turned every strength into a cage. This is a story about what happens when a joke becomes heritage, heritage becomes property, and property becomes a prison. One plate, one city, one century, and the slow crack that nobody heard until it was too late. The real war was never about food. It was about what happens when a city pours its identity into something it can eat, and then forgets to keep eating. If you stay until the end, you'll never look at a local icon the same way again. Subscribe now, and let's open the door. There is a building on West Main Street that smells like it remembers everything. Onion grease, charred meat. The ghost of 1,000 2 a.m. arguments settled over styrofoam. You walk in, and the fluorescent lights don't welcome you. They just report you. You're here. The grill is here. That's the transaction. It's 1918 when this story starts, but we're not there yet. We're standing in the present, in a parking lot that's too empty for a Thursday night, outside a brick building whose sign has been photographed more times than most Rochester landmarks. The windows are dark at the edges. There's a menu board inside that hasn't changed its prices enough to keep up with the decade. And there's a flat-top grill the size of a dining table, seasoned with so many layers of carbon it might technically qualify as geology. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. You hear it before you understand it, the sizzle. Not the gentle restaurant sizzle of a gastropub searing a duck breast. This is industrial, a wet, aggressive hiss like a steam pipe cracking in a basement. Chopped onions hit the surface and scream. A metal spatula scrapes underneath, a sound so specific to this place that if you recorded it and played it on a street corner in Rochester, half the people passing would know exactly where it came from. This is Nick Tahou's Hots, and for most of the 20th century this grill was the closest thing Rochester, New York had to a cultural embassy. Not the Eastman Theatre, not the George Eastman Museum, not Kodak even, though Kodak and this grill share more DNA than anyone likes to admit. Both were Rochester born. Both were built on repetition. Both served a product so local it became universal. And both would eventually learn the same lesson, that being an icon doesn't protect you from becoming a relic. But that's later. Right now, in this cold open, we need to understand one thing. This isn't a restaurant story. This is a story about what happens when a city pours its identity into a single dish, and then watches the dish, the family, and the building all fracture at the same time in slow motion, with nobody able to name the exact moment it broke. The plate. Let's talk about the plate. It's called a garbage plate, that's the real name. Trademarked. Legally protected. You cannot open a restaurant in the state of New York and put those two words together on your menu without risking a letter from an attorney. And the dish itself is exactly what the name promises. A heap. 2 cheeseburgers, or hot dogs, or Italian sausage, or a combination, dropped onto a bed of home fries and macaroni salad, then buried under a proprietary meat sauce, mustard, onions, and a roll on the side that exists mostly as a joke, because no human being is using bread as a vehicle when there's already a pound of starch on the plate. It is obscene. It is magnificent. It is the kind of food that looks like a mistake and tastes like a dare you keep taking for 40 years. And the people of Rochester don't just eat it. They argue about it. They rank it. They road trip for it. They bring out-of-towners to Nick Tahou's the way Parisians bring tourists to a patisserie. Not to impress, but to test. Do you understand us? Can you handle this? Because if you can eat this plate and love it, you might understand what this city is. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. Now. Here's where the story turns. Because this plate, this heap of hot grease and loyalty, is also a legal document, a family wound, a trademark dispute, a real estate question, and eventually a referendum on whether Rochester itself has changed too much to keep its oldest comfort alive. The family that built it will split. The name will become a border, the building will go up for sale, and the plate, the actual physical plate of food, will keep being made across the city by dozens of imitators who can copy every ingredient but cannot legally call it what it is. This is a story about what happens when a joke becomes heritage, heritage becomes property, and property becomes a cage. And it starts the way all Rochester stories start, with a factory, with a shift, with someone who needs to eat fast, eat cheap, and get back to work. 1918. Hold that number in your head. Let it sit there like a date stamped on a brick. Rochester in 1918 is not the Rochester you know. It's a city with muscle. Kodak is hiring. Bausch & Lomb is grinding lenses. Xerox doesn't exist yet, but the energy that will birth it is already here. An appetite for making things, stamping things, shipping things. The Genesee River cuts through downtown like an assembly line made of water, and along its banks factories stack up like vertebrae in a spine. The workers come in shifts. Morning swing, graveyard. They punch clocks. They carry lunch pails, but lunch pails aren't always enough. When you're burning 4,000 calories, hauling steel, or feeding paper into a press, you need a meal that hits like a paycheck. Fast, heavy, and all at once. This is the world that produces Nick Tahou. The name is Greek. The family is immigrant. The ambition is simple and brutal. Feed the workers. Not with elegance, not with variety, with volume. One plate, one price, everything on it. There is no grand opening ceremony, no newspaper feature, no Yelp review. There is just a counter, a grill, and a man who understands that the fastest way to earn loyalty in a factory town is to make sure no one leaves hungry. The early menu is almost primitive in its honesty. Hot dogs, potatoes, maybe some macaroni. The portions are designed not for appetite, but for labour. You eat this, and you can lift things for another 6 hours. The plate isn't a concept yet, it's just a habit, a reflex. You sit down, you get a heap, you pay almost nothing, you leave full. One plate, one paycheck, one meal that has to last. And here's the thing about factory towns. They create rituals without meaning to. When 3,000 people eat at the same place after the same shift, week after week, year after year, the food stops being food. It becomes infrastructure. It becomes as reliable as the bus route, as necessary as the time clock. You don't choose it. You just go. Nick Tahou's becomes that. Not famous, not reviewed, just present. A fixed point in the geography of blue-collar Rochester, as permanent as the smokestacks and the rail lines and the sound of a whistle at 6 a.m. Factories feed cities. This place fed the factory workers, and the plate, still unnamed, still unbranded, still just the usual or everything on it, begins to accumulate something more valuable than a recipe. It accumulates memory. 10 years of memories, 20, 30, fathers bring sons. Fathers. Second shift guys tell third shift guys. The grill never goes cold long enough to forget. It starts as necessity. And later, much later, it becomes a trophy. But we're not there yet. We're still in the era of function. The era before the name, before the trademark, before the family learns that the most dangerous thing you can do with a tradition is write it down on a legal document. Because right now, in 1918, the plate belongs to everyone who eats it. It's communal property. It's air. And nobody has yet realized that air can be owned. The name arrives the way most legends do, sideways, late at night, from someone who probably didn't mean it. There are versions of this story. Every Rochesterian has one. The most common goes like this. A customer, maybe a college kid, maybe a shift worker, maybe someone 3 beers past careful, looks at the plate and says something like, "Just give me all the garbage on it." Or, "What is this, a garbage plate?" The exact words don't matter. What matters is that the name sticks. Not because it's clever, because it's accurate. Look at the plate. Really look at it. It's a topographic event. 2 cheeseburger patties, cracked at the edges, glistening, sitting on a base layer of home fries that have been chopped and fried until they're half crisp, half soft, somewhere between a hash brown and a demolition site. Next to that, a scoop of macaroni salad, cold, creamy, slightly sweet, acting as the only cooling agent in an otherwise thermal landscape. Then the sauce, the meat hot sauce. This is the signature, the DNA, the thing that separates Nick Tahou's from every imitator that will eventually come. It's not chili, it's not bolognese, it's something in between, loose, spiced, almost granular, ladled on top like mortar on a brick wall, then mustard, then raw onions, then a roll tucked to the side like an afterthought, which it is. The whole thing weighs more than some textbooks. It costs less than a movie ticket. And it looks from above like someone dropped a lunch tray down a flight of stairs. That's the joke. That's the name. Garbage. But here's the thing about naming something garbage. You're either killing it, or you're baptizing it. And in Rochester, the name doesn't diminish the plate. It elevates it, because the name carries a dare. It says, this food doesn't care what you think. It's not trying to be pretty. It's not plated on ceramic with a sprig of microgreen. It's piled on styrofoam and handed across a counter by someone who has already made 40 of them tonight, and will make 40 more before close. The name is a joke that survives the night, and then outlives the decade. By the time the University of Rochester and Rochester Institute of Technology students discover it, and they discover it the way every generation of college students discovers cheap, excessive late-night food, which is to say, with the devotion of the recently converted, the garbage plate has become something more than a menu item. It's a social ritual, a test of endurance, a story you tell when you go home for Thanksgiving. You haven't lived until you've had a garbage plate at 2 a.m. This sentence, or some version of it, gets repeated so many times across so many dorm rooms and so many decades that it becomes Rochester's unofficial tourism slogan, not printed on any brochure, just carried in the mouths of everyone who ever sat on a plastic stool at Nick Tahou's with sauce on their chin and a conviction that this exact, ridiculous, glorious moment was what being from Rochester meant. And here's where the plate begins its mutation, its species change. Because in the beginning, the plate was fuel, workingmen's calories, industrial nutrition. It existed because factories existed, because shifts existed, because men needed dense food at odd hours. The plate was a product of the economy. But now, in the college era, the plate becomes culture. It becomes identity. It becomes the thing you do, not because you need the calories, but because you need the experience. The function hasn't changed. It's still cheap, still heavy, still excessive, but the meaning has shifted entirely. You're not eating to work, you're eating to belong. This is the moment that changes everything, and almost nobody notices it happening, because when food crosses the line from function to identity, it becomes fragile in ways that function never was. Functional food just needs to be available. Identity food needs to be authentic. It needs to be original. It needs to be the real one, from the real place, made by the real family. And the moment that distinction matters, The moment authentic becomes the currency, someone is going to want to own it. Not just make it, own it. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill, and the truth the grill is about to tell is this. The most dangerous moment in the life of any tradition is the moment someone realizes it has value. Because value attracts protection. Protection attracts paperwork, and paperwork, as this family is about to learn, doesn't just preserve things, it divides them. The plate keeps piling up, the sauce keeps ladling, the name keeps spreading. And somewhere in a filing cabinet that doesn't exist yet, a trademark application is waiting to be born. And then someone decides the joke is worth owning. Let's talk about what a trademark actually is. Not legally, we'll get to the legal language, but practically, emotionally. What does it mean to own a word? It means that a sequence of sounds that used to belong to the air, to every mouth that said it, every menu that printed it, every late-night conversation that shouted it across a parking lot, now belongs to a filing, a piece of paper, a registration number. It means that a word born in a crowd becomes property held by a person. In 1991, the Tahou family files for federal trademark registration on 2 words. Garbage plate. Read that again. Not Nick Tahou's famous garbage plate. Not the original Rochester garbage plate. Just garbage plate. 2 common English words that separately mean refuse and dishware. Together, in the context of Rochester, New York, they mean everything. The application moves through the United States Patent and Trademark Office. In 1992, it is registered. The goods description is specific. Restaurant services. The mark is now live. Legally enforceable. Protected. 1991. Filed. 1992. Registered. 2 dates, 2 stamps. And the entire garbage plate ecosystem of Rochester shifts on its axis. Now, to be clear, this is not unusual. Businesses trademark their products. It's standard practice. It's smart practice. If you've built something recognizable, you protect the name. That's capitalism working as designed. There is nothing scandalous about this filing. Nothing underhanded. Nothing that a business attorney wouldn't recommend to any client with a regionally famous product. But here's the paradox. And this is the engine of the entire story. The garbage plate didn't become famous because of the Tahou family's marketing. It became famous because of the city, because of the students who spread it, because of the shift workers who repeated it, because of the late-night mythology that grew up around it like ivy on a wall. The name was born in a crowd. It was carried by a community. It was, in every emotional sense, Rochester's word. And now it was one family's word. Rochester invents a food anyone can copy, then learns the name is locked. This is where the story gets quiet in a way that matters, because on the surface, nothing changes. The grill is still hot, the plates are still piling up, the line still forms on Friday nights. But underneath, a new gravity has entered the system. Every other restaurant in Rochester that serves a plate, and there are dozens because the recipe is simple and the demand is real, now has to make a choice. Do you call it what everyone calls it? Or do you find another name? Most find another name. Trash plate, dumpster plate, junkyard plate. The linguistic gymnastics become a running joke across the city, a game of synonyms played under legal pressure, and every renamed plate on every competing menu is a quiet advertisement for the original. Because when you see trash plate at a restaurant on Monroe Avenue, you know exactly what they're not allowed to call it, and you know exactly where the real name lives. The trademark doesn't just protect the brand, it amplifies it. But it also does something else, something the family may not have anticipated. It draws a line, a legal line, yes, but also an emotional one. Because in the minds of Rochesterians, the garbage plate was never just a product. It was a commons, a shared inheritance, and when you fence off a commons, even if you have every legal right to do so, the people who used to roam it freely start to feel something they can't quite name. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The grill never sleeps. But the paperwork does something worse. It freezes. It freezes the name in place. It freezes the family's relationship to the city. And it sets the stage for a fracture that won't show up for years. But when it does, it will follow the exact line that the trademark drew. Let's leave the paperwork for a moment. Let's go back to the building. 320 West Main Street, downtown Rochester. If you've never been, here's what you need to understand. This is not a building that was designed to be a restaurant. It was designed to be something else entirely. Something heavier, older, more industrial. The bones of this structure carry the memory of railroad traffic, of freight, of an era when downtown Rochester was a switching yard for goods and bodies, a transit hub where things arrived and departed on schedule, and the architecture existed to move volume, not to charm. The Tahou family lands here around 1968, and the building absorbs them the way old buildings absorb everything, slowly, without comment. The fixtures age, the counters wear, the ceiling tiles yellow under decades of grease vapour, and none of it gets replaced, not because the family can't afford to, but because replacement would be a kind of betrayal. The patina is the product, the wear is the proof. You don't just walk into a restaurant, you walk into a leftover century. This is something that food, television and travel media will eventually discover and fetishize. The authentic dive, the no-frills joint, the place where the decor is its own dare. And Nick Tahou's fits the template so perfectly it almost feels engineered. But it's not. It's just old. It's just a building that was never renovated because the food was good enough to make renovation irrelevant. And here's where the building becomes dangerous. Because when a place looks like history, people start treating it like history. They photograph it. They write about it. They bring visitors. And slowly, invisibly, the building stops being a container for the business and starts being the business itself. The brand isn't just the plate anymore. The brand is the experience of sitting in this specific room, under these specific lights, on these specific stools, eating off this specific counter, which means the brand can't move, it can't modernize, it can't adapt. Because the moment you replace the stools, you've broken the spell. The moment you renovate the bathroom, someone on the internet writes a eulogy. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. And the truth is this. The building is both the greatest asset and the heaviest anchor. It's the reason people come and the reason the business can't evolve. It's a museum that has to function as a restaurant, a landmark that has to turn a profit. And those two jobs, preserving memory and generating revenue, are not the same job. They are, in fact, opposing jobs, because memory wants things to stay the same, and revenue needs things to grow. The building doesn't know this yet. The family's about to learn. Think about what the Tahou family's managing by the late 20th century. They have a trademarked dish. They have a building that functions as a cultural monument. They have a customer base that is equal parts loyal and nostalgic, which sounds like the same thing but isn't. Loyal customers come back because the food is good. Nostalgic customers come back because the memory is good, and they will forgive almost anything as long as the memory holds. The family is running a restaurant and curating a feeling simultaneously, and the margins on feelings are terrible, and the city around them is shifting. Downtown Rochester in the late 20th century is not the downtown of 1918. The factories are thinning. Kodak, which once employed over 60,000 people in the Rochester area, is beginning its long contraction. The foot traffic that once powered every lunch counter within walking distance of the industrial core is evaporating, not all at once, but in a slow bleed that takes decades to fully register. The shift workers who built the garbage plate's original customer base are aging out, retiring, moving to suburbs, dying. The students are still coming, the late-night crowd is still coming, but they come on their schedule. Weekends, bar hours, special occasions. They don't come at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday the way a factory worker does. They don't come with the regularity of a punch clock. The grill doesn't know the difference. It heats up either way. But the register does. The register knows exactly when the rhythm changes. And now, inside the family, a different kind of pressure is building. Because the Tahou name isn't just a name anymore. It's a trademark. It's a building. It's a legacy that multiple family members have a claim to, emotionally, if not always legally. And when a legacy gets valuable enough to protect, it also gets valuable enough to fight over. But the brand gets bigger than the building, and the family gets smaller. We're approaching the crack. The moment when the story of Nick Tahou stops being a story about food and starts being a story about inheritance, about control, about what happens when two people share a last name, share a recipe, share a city, but can't share a future. The building sits on West Main Street, patient as brick. It has survived railroad schedules and factory closures and highway construction and urban renewal. It will survive this too. But what happens inside it, what happens to the name on its sign, is about to change in a way that the building can't absorb. Because buildings can hold history, but they can't hold families together. Here's how a family cracks. Not with a public explosion, not with a press conference or a lawsuit headline that makes the evening news. It cracks the way a foundation cracks, along a line that was always there, invisible under the surface following the grain of the stone. The Tahou family, by the late 20th century, is operating more than one location. There's the original on West Main Street, the cathedral, the mothership, the building with the railroad bones. And there's a second location, operating under the name Nick Tahou's 2 on Lyell Avenue. Same food, same name, same family tree. 2 branches of the same operation, serving the same plates to different neighbourhoods. On paper, this is expansion, growth, a sign of health. A family business doing what family businesses are supposed to do, spreading the recipe, reaching new customers, building equity in new zip codes. But inside the family, the 2 locations represent something else. They represent 2 visions, 2 interpretations of what the Tahou name means, who gets to carry it, and how far it can stretch before it stops being one thing and becomes 2 things wearing the same mask. The details of the family dynamics are private in the way that all family dynamics are private. You hear versions, you read between lines, you notice which names appear together in articles and which names don't. What's public is the outcome, and the outcome is a clean, irreversible break. In 2007, Nick Tahou's 2 on Lyell Avenue becomes Steve T's Hots and Potatoes. Read that sentence again, feel the weight of it. A family member takes a location that carried the Tahou name and renames it. Not because the food changed, not because the customers changed, because the family changed, because the name, that trademarked, legally bounded 2-word empire, couldn't belong to everyone anymore. Same blood, same city, same plate, different sign. Steve T's Hots and Potatoes. The name is functional, honest. It tells you exactly what you'll get. But it doesn't carry the mythology. It doesn't carry the century. It doesn't carry the weight of Nick Tahou's, which by 2007 is less a restaurant name and more a Rochester institution. A phrase that triggers memory, loyalty, argument and pride in equal measure. And here's the quiet part. The name can't follow the family. Because the trademark, that 1991 filing, that 1992 registration, means the garbage plate belongs to the original, to West Main Street, to whichever branch of the family controls the mark. The recipe can travel, the skills can travel, the muscle memory of assembling a plate, scoop of McSalad, pile of home fries, 2 patties, ladle of sauce, mustard, onions, roll, that can travel anywhere. But the name stays behind. The name is a fixed point, bolted to a legal filing, and you can take your spatula and your talent and your birthright to Lyell Avenue or anywhere else in the world, but you cannot take those 2 words with you. A family recipe becomes a family border. This is the fracture that Rochester notices. Not everyone, not all at once. But in the diners and the comment sections and the barstool debates, people start to register that something has shifted. There are now 2 places making essentially the same food, born from the same family, carrying different names, and the city has to choose. Or rather, the city has to acknowledge that a choice exists, which is itself a kind of loss. Because before the split there was no choice. There was just Nick Tahou's, one name, one place, one answer to the question, where do you get a plate? Now there are 2 answers. And 2 answers, in the economy of civic identity, is one too many. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. And now there are 2 grills. 2 factories with the same blueprint, the same product, the same muscle memory, but different names on the door. And the city stands between them like a child in a hallway, hearing 2 versions of the same story coming from 2 different rooms. The split doesn't destroy Nick Tahou's. Not immediately. The original still has the name, still has the building, still has the trademark, still has the weight of history pressing down on every stool and every grill mark. But something has been lost, something that no trademark filing can restore. The illusion of unity, the feeling that this was one family's gift to one city, unbroken, undivided, whole. That feeling is gone, and it's not coming back. Now zoom out, pull the camera above Rochester and look at the landscape of plates, because the garbage plate, the dish, not the trademark, is everywhere. It has been everywhere for decades. Every diner, every hot dog stand, every late-night counter within a 50-mile radius of Rochester has some version of the plate on its menu. The recipe isn't secret. It was never secret. Cheeseburgers, mac salad, home fries, meat sauce. You can teach someone to make it in 15 minutes. You can replicate it in any kitchen with a flat-top grill and a ladle. The dish is open source, the name is proprietary. And that gap, between what anyone can make and what only one family can call it, creates a strange gravitational field across Rochester's food economy. Every restaurant that serves a plate has to navigate this field. Every menu is a legal document in disguise. Every word choice is a calculation. You want to see Trademark gravity in action? Walk down Monroe Avenue, walk through the East End, drive out to the suburbs, count the plates, count the names, trash plate, dumpster plate, rubbish plate, junkyard plate, compost plate, sloppy plate. Each name is a workaround. Each name is an admission. Each name says, we know what this is, you know what this is, everyone in this city knows what this is, but we can't call it what it is. The linguistic gymnastics become part of Rochester's identity, a running joke that's funny until you think about it too long. Because what does it mean when a city's most famous dish can only be called by its real name in one building? It means the name has more power than the recipe. It means the word matters more than the food. And it means that every plate served under a fake name is paradoxically an advertisement for the original. Because every trash plate on every menu in Rochester is a sign pointing back to West Main Street saying, the real one is over there. We just can't say so out loud. Imagine cooking your childhood, but not being allowed to call it by its name. This is the reality for every garbage plate competitor in Rochester. They're making the same food. Sometimes, whisper it, they're making it better. The meat sauce varies, the home fries vary, the portions vary. Some places char the burgers harder. Some places use a spicier sauce. Some places have cleaner kitchens, faster service, better hours. The market is competitive, and competition tends to improve products. But none of them can use the name. And in the attention economy, the economy of search engines and food blogs and Instagram hashtags and travel show segments, the name is the product. A tourist doesn't Google Rochester trash plate. They Google Rochester garbage plate. And where does that search lead? To Nick Tahou's. Always to Nick Tahou's. The trademark functions as a permanent SEO advantage, a gravitational well that pulls every curious outsider toward one address, regardless of whether that address is still serving the best version of the dish. The trademark doesn't just protect the brand, it bends the city around it. And inside that gravitational field, something else is happening. Something quieter, more corrosive. The trademark creates a two-tier system. There's the real garbage plate, legally sanctioned, historically authentic, served at the original location. And there's everything else. The copies, the workarounds, the renamed versions that everyone knows are the same thing but can't say so. And that two-tier system breeds resentment. Not loud resentment, not protest in the streets resentment, the slow, simmering kind, the kind that shows up in comment sections, in Reddit threads, in conversations at other restaurants where someone says, honestly, the plate at other places is better than Nick Tahou's, and everyone nods, and the nodding itself is a quiet act of rebellion against the trademark's authority. Because here's what trademark gravity can't do. It can't make the food better. It can't keep the grill hotter. It can't make the service faster, or the hours longer, or the building cleaner. It can only make the name exclusive, and exclusivity, in a city where dozens of places serve the same dish, is a shield that protects you from competition, but also from the feedback that competition provides. When you're the only one allowed to use the name, you don't have to be the best, you just have to be the original, and original is a currency that depreciates. Slowly, invisibly, but relentlessly. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. Show two grills now. Nick Tahou's on West Main, Steve T's on Lyell Avenue. Two flat tops, seasoned the same way, heated to the same temperature, loaded with the same onions. Two spatulas scraping. Two ticket printers chattering. The sound is identical. The smell is identical. The plates that slide across the counter are to any blind taste test siblings, but one carries the name and one doesn't. Two factories, one blueprint. One border between them that was drawn not by a chef, not by a customer, not by the city, but by a filing in the United States Patent and Trademark Office, dated 1991, registered 1992, and still enforceable today. The grill doesn't care about trademarks, the grill just heats up. But the world around the grill, the world of names and searches and legal letters and family borders, that world is shaped entirely by two words on a piece of paper. And while the trademark holds the city in its orbit, the world outside Rochester is about to arrive, loudly, briefly, and with cameras. Then the outside world piles on. The call comes from outside. It always does. A food show wants to feature the plate. A travel writer wants to profile the restaurant. A YouTube channel with 2 million subscribers wants to film a challenge video. Can you eat the whole thing in under 10 minutes? An airline magazine puts Rochester on a hidden gems list, and the garbage plate is the centerpiece. A national newspaper runs a weekend feature. The headline is something like, "The glorious mess that defines a city," and for a weekend, Rochester trends. Fame arrives like weather. It's sudden, it's visible, everyone feels it, and then it passes. The pattern is always the same. The media hits, the tourists come, they stand in line, they photograph the plate from above, the overhead shot, the Instagram angle, the one that makes it look like a beautiful disaster. They post, they tag, they leave. And for a week, maybe two, the line at Nick Tahou's is longer than usual, the register rings a little faster, the grill works a little harder. It feels like a boom, but it's not a boom, it's a spike. And spikes, by definition, come down, because the tourist doesn't come back. The tourist was never going to come back. The tourist came for the story, not the food. They came to say they did it. The same way people eat a scorpion in Bangkok or drink snake wine in Hanoi. It's an experience, a checkmark, a content piece, and once the content is posted, the transaction is complete. The tourist returns to wherever they came from, and the stool they sat on goes empty again. Fame is loud. But it doesn't pay rent when the line disappears. And this is the trap of media-driven fame for a place like Nick Tahou's. The fame doesn't convert. It doesn't build a sustainable customer base. It builds awareness, massive, national, viral awareness among people who will never eat at the restaurant again. The people who will eat there again, the locals, the regulars, the Rochesterians who have been coming for decades, they don't need the fame. They already know. And some of them, watching the tourist line stretch out the door, start to feel something uncomfortable. The sense that their place is being performed, not patronised. That the restaurant they grew up in has become a set piece in someone else's content strategy. The fame also creates a dangerous expectation gap. When a national food show films your restaurant, they bring lighting, they bring angles, they bring a host who is professionally enthusiastic, who takes a bite and rolls their eyes in rehearsed ecstasy. They make the plate look transcendent. And when a real tourist shows up 3 months later and sits on a cracked stool under fluorescent lights and gets a plate that is exactly what it's always been, heavy, greasy, honest, unglamorous, the gap between the broadcast and the reality can feel like a betrayal. The reviews start to shift. Not all of them, not the locals, but the tourist reviews, the Yelp reviews, the Google reviews from people with a single data point and an expectation shaped by television. Overhyped, not worth the drive, dirty, overrated. These words appear more and more frequently, and each one is a small tax on the restaurant's reputation, a tax that the fame itself created. This is the paradox of attention without infrastructure. Nick Tahou's gets the spotlight, but it doesn't have the machinery to capitalize on it. There's no merch line, no franchise model, no national expansion plan, no social media team, no loyalty app. There's a building, a grill, a family, and a trademark. That's the entire operation. And when fame comes to an operation like that, it doesn't build, it extracts. It takes the story, packages it, distributes it, and moves on to the next hidden gem, leaving the original a little more exposed and a little more tired than before. The grill doesn't know it's famous. The grill just heats up. But the people running the grill know. They feel the spike and the drop. They see the line form and then dissolve. They read the reviews that praise the history and criticize the present. And they face a choice that every small, iconic, place-bound business eventually faces. Do you change to meet the new audience? Or do you stay the same and hope the old audience holds? Nick Tahou's, by temperament and by constraint, stays the same. The menu doesn't expand, the building doesn't renovate, the hours don't extend. The prices inch up, but not enough to match costs. The operation continues as it always has, one grill, one counter, one plate at a time, while the city and the economy and the attention cycle all accelerate around it. And here's the thing about staying the same. It feels like a virtue until it becomes a vulnerability. We never changed is a point of pride when things are going well. When things aren't going well, we never changed starts to sound like we never adapted. And the line between authenticity and stubbornness is thin enough that you can cross it without ever knowing. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. And the truth the grill is telling now to anyone who listens closely is that the rhythm has changed. The lunch rush is thinner. The late-night crowd is less predictable. The stools that used to fill by muscle memory, second shift ends, walk to Nick's, order the usual, now sit empty on nights that used to be guaranteed. The factory workers who built the original customer base are gone. The students who replaced them are fickle. The tourists who supplemented them are ghosts. The plate is still the plate. The sauce is still the sauce. The building is still the building. But the ecosystem that sustained them, the web of habit and proximity and industrial scheduling that kept the grill hot and the register ringing, that ecosystem is thinning, not collapsing, not yet, just thinning, like topsoil, like a crowd, like the patience of a city that has started to wonder whether its most famous restaurant is still its best one. Optional visual, a montage, fast cuts, a magazine cover, a YouTube thumbnail, a travel blog headline, a tourist holding a plate up to a camera. Then, a wide shot, the counter, empty stools, the grill, still hot, still ready, and no one walking through the door. The war has moved, and the grill didn't move with it. There's a moment in the life of every institution when the numbers stop telling a story of growth and start telling a story of gravity. Not a crash, not a cliff, just a slow, persistent downward angle, like a road that descends so gradually you don't realize you've lost altitude until you look back at where you started. For Nick Tahou's, that moment arrives without announcement. It arrives in the form of lunch counts that don't quite reach what they were last year, in weekend nights that used to require a second person on the grill and now don't, in a register tape that, if you laid it out end to end, would be measurably shorter than the same tape from 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20. The numbers drop, and the grill keeps heating up anyway, because that's what grills do. They don't read spreadsheets. They don't track year over year. They just get hot and wait. Downtown Rochester is changing. The factories that built the original customer base are memories. Kodak, which at its peak was the heartbeat of the city, has contracted so severely that the word Kodak in Rochester now triggers not pride but something closer to grief. A civic phantom limb, the sensation of something that used to be there and isn't. The foot traffic that once flowed through downtown like a river, workers, shoppers, commuters, shift changers, has thinned to a stream, then a trickle. The lunch counters that used to thrive on this traffic have closed one by one, like lights going out on a street. Nick Tahou's is still on, but the street's getting darker. And then comes the pandemic. If the decades of demographic change were a slow leak, COVID-19 is a pipe burst. Downtown Rochester, already fragile, goes silent. The offices that provided what remained of the weekday foot traffic empty out. The bars that fed the late-night plate crowd close. The students who kept the weekend alive scatter to Zoom screens in childhood bedrooms across the state. And the grill at 320 West Main Street, the grill that has been hot since before most Rochesterians were born, faces something it has never faced before. Not competition, not bad reviews, not family drama, but the simple, annihilating absence of people. A factory can survive bad press. It can't survive a silent conveyor belt. The pandemic doesn't single out Nick Tahou's. It devastates the entire restaurant industry. But the restaurants that survive, the ones that pivot to delivery, that build online ordering systems, that leverage social media, that adapt their menus and their models to a world that has suddenly, violently reorganized around isolation, those restaurants tend to have one thing in common: flexibility. The ability to change shape, to detach from a physical location and exist, even temporarily, as a brand that can reach people where they are. Nick Tahou's has none of this flexibility. The brand is the building, the experience is the counter. The product is a plate of food that does not travel well, a heap of hot meat and cold mac salad and fries that go soggy in a takeout container, the way a newspaper goes limp in the rain. The garbage plate is a sit-down experience pretending to be a takeout product, and the pretense falls apart the moment the styrofoam lid closes. The most famous plate in town, waiting for someone to order it. Reports surface in local media. The owner speaks about the struggle. The building, that beautiful, crumbling, irreplaceable building, is listed for sale. Not the business, necessarily. The building, the physical structure that has housed the garbage plate since 1968. The walls that absorbed 50 years of grease vapor. The counter where generations sat. the floor that sagged in the places where the most feet stood the longest. The building is for sale, and in Rochester that sentence lands like an obituary written in advance. Because the building isn't just a building. We've established this. It's the brand. It's the museum. It's the proof. And when the proof goes up for sale, the city has to confront a question it has been avoiding for years. Is Nick Tahou's a living restaurant, or is it a monument that happens to serve food? Is it a business that can sustain itself, or is it a memory that requires subsidy, emotional, financial, civic, to keep existing? The grill is still hot. The grill is always hot. But the heat is starting to feel less like readiness and more like defiance. Like a furnace running in an empty house, every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill, and the truth in 2020 and 2021 and the long, slow aftermath is that the factory floor is empty, the conveyor belt is still, the product is ready but the orders aren't coming, and all the trademark protection in the world can't compel a customer to walk through a door. This is the cruelest irony in the whole story. The trademark was supposed to be the moat, the legal fortification that kept competitors from claiming the name, that funneled attention and authenticity toward one address, that guaranteed the Tahou family permanent ownership of Rochester's most famous two words. And it worked. It worked perfectly. No one else can call their plate a garbage plate. The name is locked. The moat is wide and deep and legally impregnable. But the moat doesn't matter if no one is trying to cross it. The moat doesn't matter if the castle is empty. The trademark protects the name from competitors, but it can't protect the business from irrelevance. And irrelevance doesn't attack from outside the walls. It grows from within, like mold in the mortar, like silence in a kitchen. The numbers continue to drop, not to zero. Nick Tahou's doesn't close, not yet, not in the way that would generate a definitive headline. It just gets quieter. The hours may shorten, the staff may thin. The building, already aged past the point of easy maintenance, continues to age, and the city watches the way a city always watches its landmarks decline. With concern, with commentary, with the vague intention of doing something about it that never quite crystallizes into action. Because here's what cities don't do. They don't rescue restaurants. They eulogize them. They name them in Remember When articles. They share photos of the old sign on Facebook with a sad face emoji. They argue about whose fault it is, the families, the economies, the cities, the cultures. But they don't show up at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday and order a plate. They don't reverse the demographic tide. They don't rebuild the factory workforce or refill the downtown offices or turn back the clock to an era when the grill's rhythm matched the city's pulse. The city loves Nick Tahou's. The city also let it drift. These two things are not contradictory. They're the same thing. Love without patronage is nostalgia, and nostalgia doesn't keep grills hot. Now the conversation starts, not in any formal way, not in a town hall or a newspaper editorial board. In the places where Rochester actually talks to itself. Barstools, break rooms, group chats, comment sections, the sprawling, unsorted, unmoderated court of public opinion where every Rochesterian has a take and no two takes agree. Nick Tahou's is sacred. It's the original. You have to respect that. Nick Tahou's fell off years ago. The plate at Other Place has been better since the 90s. It's not about the food. It's about the history. You don't go for the best plate. You go because it's Nick Tahou's. That's exactly the problem. You're eating a museum piece. You're eating nostalgia. Have you been lately? The sauce is different. The sauce is the same. You're different. The building is falling apart. The building is the experience. When was the last time you actually went? Silence. That last question is the one that cuts. Because in every argument about Nick Tahou's, whether it's sacred or stale, whether it's declined or just changed, whether it deserves rescue or has earned its fade, there's an unspoken audit happening. When did you last go? When did you last sit on that stool and order a plate and eat it there, in the building, under the lights, with the grill sound in your ears? Not as a nostalgia trip, not as a farewell tour, as a regular, as a customer, as someone who goes because the food is good and the habit is alive. Most people can't answer that question honestly without admitting something uncomfortable. They stopped going. Not on purpose, not as a boycott. They just stopped. Life moved. Routines changed. Other plates emerged. The suburbs pulled. The downtown emptied. And the habit, that beautiful, unthinking generational habit of going to Nick Tahou's, died quietly in 1,000 individual decisions that nobody made consciously and everybody made collectively. The restaurant's reputation becomes a proxy for something larger. It becomes the arena where Rochester argues about Rochester, about whether the city is declining or transforming, about whether the old identity, blue-collar, industrial, Kodak and plates, is worth preserving or needs to be released, about whether loyalty to the past is a form of civic pride or a form of civic paralysis. Nick Tahou's didn't ask to be a symbol, it just wanted to be a restaurant. But symbols don't get to choose their meaning, and once a city decides that your grill represents its soul, every crack in the grill becomes a crack in the city's self-image. The arguments never resolve. They just cycle. Sacred, stale, sacred, stale. The same loop, the same positions, the same unspoken guilt at the centre. And meanwhile, the grill, the actual physical, carbon-seasoned grill at 320 West Main Street, continues to heat up every day, indifferent to the discourse, producing plates for whoever shows up, which is fewer people than yesterday and more people than tomorrow, present but not visited, defended but not patronised, loved but not sustained. This is the condition of the late-stage icon, the thing that everyone claims but nobody supports, the restaurant that exists in conversation more than it exists in practice, the name that is spoken 100 times for every plate that is actually ordered, and the city, arguing about its icon, doesn't realise that the argument itself is the evidence. You don't argue about things that are thriving, you argue about things that are dying. The argument is the symptom, the silence of the empty stools, the thin lunch count, the grill that heats up and waits. The silence is the disease. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. And the grill's truth, right now, is a question. Does Rochester want this place to exist? Or does Rochester want to have wanted this place to exist? Is this love, or is this a memory of love? And is there a difference that matters? A difference you can measure in plates served, in doors opened, in grills that stay hot not because of heritage but because of hunger? The city doesn't answer. The city just argues, and the grill just waits. Let's go back inside. Not inside the argument, not inside the trademark filing or the family split or the real estate listing. Inside the plate, the actual plate. The physical object that started all of this, the heap, the mess, the gorgeous, ridiculous, stubbornly unrefined pile of food that has outlasted every controversy and every headline and every think piece about its own relevance. Pick it up, hold the styrofoam container, feel the weight. It's heavier than you expect because you always forget how heavy it is, even if you've ordered 100 of them. The bottom of the container is warm, the home fries radiating upward, still holding the heat of the flat top. The top is a landscape, not a pretty landscape, a geological one. Layers upon layers, compressed and erupting simultaneously, like a cross-section of sedimentary rock that someone poured hot sauce over. Start at the base. The home fries, chopped fried, slightly blackened at the corners, soft in the middle. These are not elegant potatoes. These are not roasted fingerlings with rosemary. These are potatoes that have been treated the way Rochester treats most things, directly, without pretense, with heat and speed, and the assumption that function matters more than form. Next to the fries, the macaroni salad, cold, creamy, a textural counterpoint that shouldn't work but does, the way a cold beer works next to a hot dog, not because the flavours complement but because the temperatures argue, and the argument is the pleasure. The mac salad is the most debated element of any plate. Too sweet, too bland, too much mayo. Every Rochesterian has an opinion, and the opinion is held with the intensity of a religious conviction. Now the protein. Cheeseburgers, let's say. 2 of them, cracked on the flat top, pressed thin, edged with a lace of grease-crisped cheese. They sit on the starch bed like keystones in an arch. Structural, essential, the element that everything else leans against. Then the sauce, the meat hot sauce. This is the soul of the plate, the ingredient that no one outside Rochester fully understands, because it doesn't map onto any existing category. It's not chili. Not quite. It's looser than chili, finer grained, almost powdery in the way the meat breaks down. It's spiced but not spicy, savoury but slightly sweet. It coats everything it touches with a thin, glistening layer that is equal parts flavour and texture. A sauce that doesn't just taste like something, but feels like something. Every restaurant in Rochester has its own version, and every version is defended with the fervour of a family secret, which in most cases it literally is. Mustard, onions, the roll. That's the plate. That's the whole thing. And if you described it to someone who had never seen it, they would think you were describing a mistake, a kitchen accident, a dare gone wrong. And they would be right, in the same way that someone describing jazz to a person who has never heard music would be right to call it noise. It is noise. It's also art. And the garbage plate is a mess. It's also, and this is the part that matters, the part that keeps the story alive, a perfect expression of a city's character. Rochester is not a pretty city. This is not an insult, it's a description. Rochester is a city that was built to make things, not to be admired. Its beauty, where it exists, is functional beauty. The beauty of a well-designed factory floor, a bridge that carries weight without complaint, a river that powers turbines without being asked to sparkle. Rochester's aesthetic is the aesthetic of use, and the garbage plate is the edible version of that aesthetic. It's not plated for the camera, it's piled for the stomach. It doesn't look good, it works good, and that's why it matters. Not as a trademark, not as a tourist attraction, not as a symbol of civic identity, though it is all those things. It matters because it's honest. Because in an era of $22 grain bowls and influencer-friendly foam and restaurants that exist primarily as photography studios with a kitchen attached, the garbage plate refuses to perform. It refuses to be beautiful. It refuses to apologize for being too much, too heavy, too cheap, too messy. It just is what it is. A plate. A pile. A meal that costs less than a cocktail and feeds you like you just finished a 12-hour shift, even if you haven't worked a shift like that in your life. When the grill is hot, you can pretend the old Rochester is still clocking in. That's the real nostalgia. Not for the restaurant, for the city, for the Rochester that made things. That punched clocks, that ate heavy because the work was heavy. The plate is a time machine that doesn't take you anywhere. It just makes the present feel for a moment like the past. And in a city that has lost so much of its industrial identity, that moment is worth more than any trademark. The plate doesn't need protecting. The plate needs eating. And the only question that has ever mattered in this story, is whether enough people will keep eating it. Not because it's famous, not because it's historic, not because a travel show told them to, but because it's Tuesday and they're hungry and the grill is hot and the stool is open and the plate is what it's always been. Too much food for not enough money, served without apology, in a building that smells like it remembers everything. So what actually cracked it? Here's where you expect a villain. A single name, a single decision, a moment where someone in a boardroom or a kitchen or a courtroom made a choice that broke the machine. That's how these stories usually work. There's a villain, there's a mistake, there's a turning point you can circle on a timeline and say, here, this is where it went wrong. But that's not this story. Not scandal, not incompetence, not a bad product, not one mistake. The garbage plate didn't crack because someone dropped it. It cracked because it was made of materials that expand at different rates. And over time, the pressure between them became structural. Let's count the layers. Layer 1, a dish becomes a brand. The garbage plate starts as fuel, workingman's food, industrial calories. It has no name, no trademark, no identity beyond the immediate transaction. You're hungry, here's a plate, go back to work. This is the strongest version of the plate because it's the most honest. It exists for one reason only, function. And function doesn't need protection, because function doesn't have enemies. Nobody trademarks air. Nobody fights over water when there's plenty. But function mutates into culture. The students arrive. The mythology builds. The plate stops being what you eat and starts being who you are. And the moment identity enters the equation, value enters the equation, and value demands ownership. Layer 2, a brand becomes paperwork, the trademark. 1991, 1992. The two words that used to belong to the air now belong to a filing cabinet. And the filing cabinet does what filing cabinets do. It creates insiders and outsiders. It draws lines. It sorts the world into authorized and unauthorized. And in doing so, it transforms a communal tradition into a proprietary asset. This isn't wrong. This is business. But it changes the physics of the situation. Because now the plate isn't just food, it's intellectual property. And intellectual property follows different rules than food. Food wants to spread. Intellectual property wants to concentrate. Food gets better when more people make it. Intellectual property gets more valuable when fewer people control it. The plate and the trademark are pulling in opposite directions, and the family is standing at the center of the tension, trying to hold both. Layer 3. Paperwork reshapes family. The trademark doesn't cause the family split. Families split for private reasons that outsiders can narrate but never fully understand. But the trademark defines the terms of the split. It determines who keeps the name and who has to find a new one. It turns a family disagreement into a branding event. It makes the private public in the most commercial way possible, through a sign on a building. 2007. Nick Tahou's 2 becomes Steve T's Hots and Potatoes, and the crack that was always there, in the family and the business, in the relationship between the name and the people who carry it, becomes visible from the street. A family recipe becomes a family border, and the border hardens. Layer 4. The city changes around the building. This is the slowest layer, and therefore the most lethal. Rochester in 2020 is not Rochester in 1918. The factories are gone. Kodak is a fraction of its former self. The downtown that once pulsed with shift workers and commuters and lunch counter regulars has become a quieter, more cautious place. A downtown of office workers who eat at their desks, of remote employees who don't commute at all, of a nightlife that has migrated to other neighborhoods and other formats. The building at 320 West Main Street hasn't moved, but the city has moved away from it, not in anger, not in rejection, just in the slow, unconscious drift of a population following jobs and habits and housing to places that aren't downtown, that aren't near the grill, that aren't part of the ecosystem that kept the plate alive. Layer 5. The pandemic arrives and removes the remaining oxygen. Not just for Nick Tahou's, for every restaurant, every downtown business, every place that depended on the physical presence of human bodies in a specific location at a specific time. The pandemic is the great accelerant. It doesn't create problems, it fast-forwards them. Every weakness that existed before March 2020 becomes a crisis after it. And for a restaurant whose brand is inseparable from its building, whose product doesn't travel well, whose customer base was already thinning, the pandemic isn't a new disease. It's the old disease, running at 10 times the speed. The fight wasn't just personal, it was architectural, legal, generational. Stack the layers. A dish becomes a brand becomes paperwork. Paperwork reshapes family. The city changes around the building. The pandemic removes the last buffer. No single villain. No single decision. No single crack. Just 5 forces, each one reasonable in isolation, each one manageable on its own, but together, compounding, interlocking, feeding each other in a chain of causality that, viewed from above, looks less like a series of mistakes and more like a system working exactly as systems work, slowly, inevitably, without anyone at the controls, and the quiet factory kept running until the city stopped needing it. This is the answer. This is what cracked the icon. Not a person, not a moment, a structure, a set of conditions that made the crack inevitable. Not because anyone was foolish, but because the forces were patient, and the forces were stronger than any grill, any trademark, any family, any building. The plate is still there. The recipe is still there. The name is still locked in a federal registry. The building still stands on West Main Street carrying its railroad bones and its grease-stained ceiling tiles and its memory of every plate that was ever assembled on its counter. But the system that sustained it, the web of factories and shifts and foot traffic and habit and identity, that system has been disassembled piece by piece over the course of a century, and no amount of trademark protection can rebuild a system. You can own the name, you can own the building, you can own every legal right to every word associated with the plate. You cannot own the conditions that made people hungry for it. Quiet now. The camera holds. No narration for a moment. Just the sound of the building breathing, the hum of the fluorescent tubes, the tick of the flat top cooling and reheating in its cycle, the faint rattle of a ventilation fan that has been running so long it has become part of the silence rather than a break from it. A hand reaches for the spatula. The metal is warm before it touches the grill, warmed by proximity, by the ambient heat of a surface that has been hot for longer than most people have been alive. The spatula scrapes. That sound, the sharp, flat metallic drag across seasoned steel, fills the room the way a church bell fills a valley. Not loud, just present, unavoidable. Onions go down, the sizzle. It's the same sizzle, the same chemical reaction. Moisture hitting hot metal, cells rupturing, sugars caramelizing. Maillard reaction doing what it has done since the first human put food near fire. The sound hasn't changed since 1918. Hasn't changed since the first plate was assembled and slid across the counter to a man who had been lifting things for 8 hours and needed to be full more than he needed to be impressed. Home fries go down next, chopped, spread, pressed flat with the spatula. They hiss differently than the onions, lower, steadier, a sustained white noise that becomes the baseline of the kitchen. The cook's hands move without thought. This is not cooking. This is assembly. This is muscle memory so deep it lives in the tendons, not the brain. Scoop, spread, press, flip. The movements are identical to the movements of 10,000 cooks who stood in this exact spot and made this exact plate and never once thought of themselves as artists or historians or custodians of cultural heritage. They were just making plates. That's all, just plates. 2 cheeseburger patties hit the grill. The sizzle peaks, louder now, fattier, the sound of beef fat rendering against carbon-seasoned steel. The cook presses them once with the spatula, flattening them slightly, creating more surface contact, more crust, more of that lace-edge char that is the textural signature of a garbage plate burger. Cheese goes on, American cheese, because this is not a dish that concerns itself with artisanal distinctions. The cheese melts unevenly, pooling in the creases of the patty, draping over the edges like a flag lowered to half-mast. The plate assembles itself, or rather, the cook assembles it with such practiced fluency that it looks automatic, like watching a machine that happens to have hands. Home fries on one side, mac salad on the other, burgers on top, then the sauce, ladled from a pot that has been simmering so long the surface has developed a skin, broken by the ladle, poured in a thick, even stream over the entire construction. Mustard from a squeeze bottle, applied in a zigzag that no one will see once the onions go on. Raw onions, chopped, scattered like confetti at a funeral. The roll, tucked to the side, almost an apology. The plate slides across the counter. It weighs more than £1. It costs less than $10. It looks like a catastrophe. It smells like Rochester. And for a moment, just a moment, the building is what it was. The grill is speaking. The counter has a customer. The fluorescent lights are doing their job, which is not to flatter, but to illuminate honestly, without romance, the transaction that has been happening in this room for over a century. Someone is hungry, and someone is feeding them. This is what a factory looks like when it's running. Not the abandoned kind, not the ruin-porn kind, the kind with broken windows and graffiti and photographers who call decay aesthetic, the running kind. The kind where the machinery still works, where the product still comes out, where the conveyor belt still moves, even if it's moving slower than it used to, even if the orders are fewer, even if the world outside the loading dock has changed so completely that the factory itself feels like a message from another century. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill. The plate sits on the counter. Steam rises from it in thin threads, curling upward toward the ceiling, disappearing into the ventilation system, joining the accumulated vapor of 1,000,000 plates before it. The steam looks, if you let your eyes blur, like smoke from a factory chimney. The kind of smoke that used to mean a city was working, a city was producing, a city was alive. One plate, made in near silence, assembled by hands that know the work so well they could do it in the dark, served to a room that is mostly empty, on a counter that has held more plates than any surface in Rochester, in a building that was old before the plate had a name. The camera holds on the steam, rising, thinning, disappearing. In Rochester, history doesn't always live in museums. Sometimes it lives on a grill, waiting for the next order. Pull back now, all the way back, out of the building, above the city, past the story. Let the specific dissolve into the universal, because this isn't just a story about a restaurant, and it's not just a story about Rochester. It's a story about what happens to anything, any product, any brand, any institution, that becomes more valuable as a symbol than as a function. The garbage plate worked when it was food. It cracked when it became heritage. This is the lesson. The quiet, structural, uncomfortable lesson that lives under every chapter of this story, under every irony, under every legal filing and family split and empty stool. When a product is functional, it serves a need. And as long as the need exists, the product survives. The need doesn't care about trademarks. It doesn't care about buildings. It doesn't care about family names or media coverage or civic pride. It just needs to be met. You're hungry. Here's a plate. Transaction complete. But when a product becomes a symbol, it stops serving a need and starts serving a narrative. And narratives are fragile in ways that needs are not. Narratives require belief. They require continuity. They require an audience that agrees on the story and keeps showing up to hear it. And the moment the audience changes, the moment the factory workers retire, and the students scatter, and the tourists move on to the next hidden gem, the narrative loses its congregation, and the symbol stands alone, beautiful and empty, like a cathedral in a city that stopped praying. The Tahou family didn't do anything wrong. That's the part that's hard to accept. We want someone to blame, because blame makes the story manageable. Blame means there was a choice, and a different choice could have produced a different outcome, but there was no single choice. There was a series of perfectly rational decisions. Protect the name, maintain the tradition, keep the building, serve the plate the way it's always been served. Each one defensible, each one prudent, each one a brick in a wall that slowly surrounded the business and cut it off from the air. This is how icons suffocate. Not from attack, from preservation. Because preservation, taken far enough, becomes paralysis. When you can't change the menu because the menu is tradition. When you can't renovate the building because the building is the brand. When you can't expand the name because the name is a trademark tied to one address. When you can't evolve the product because evolution would be betrayal. Every strength becomes a constraint. Every asset becomes an anchor. And the business, weighed down by the accumulated mass of its own history, sinks so slowly that nobody notices until the waterline is at the windows. This is not unique to Nick Tahou's. This is the pattern. This is the universal architecture of institutional decline, and it repeats across industries, across centuries, across every domain where something beloved becomes something preserved. Kodak had the same disease. The film was too good. The brand was too strong. The legacy was too heavy. And when the world changed, when digital arrived, when the need shifted, the company couldn't follow, because following would mean abandoning the thing that made it great. Kodak didn't die of incompetence. It died of identity. It knew too well what it was, and it couldn't become what it needed to be. The garbage plate is Rochester's Kodak moment, a product so perfectly suited to one era that it becomes a liability in the next. Not because the product failed, because the era moved. And here is the final irony, the one that sits at the bottom of the plate like the last bite of McSalad, cold and heavy and impossible to ignore. The trademark was supposed to guarantee permanence. It was supposed to lock the name in place, to ensure that no matter what happened to the city or the family or the building, the words garbage plate would always belong to the Tahou legacy. And it did. It worked. The trademark held. The name is still protected. The legal fortress is intact. But permanence isn't survival. Owning a name isn't the same as owning a future. You can hold the deed to a word and still lose the world that gave the word its meaning. The trademark preserved the brand in the same way a jar preserves a firefly, so perfectly, completely, and without any of the light. The joke becomes property, the property becomes a cage, and the cage outlasts the thing it was built to protect. Let's end where we started. Not with a thesis, not with a lesson. With the grill. It's night. The parking lot on West Main Street is sparse. The brick facade is dark at the upper floors, lit at street level by the glow leaking through the windows. A warm, yellow, slightly greasy glow that looks the same as it looked in 1975 and 1992 and 2003 and last Tuesday. Inside, the flat top is on. It's always on. The carbon layer on the steel is so thick it has its own archaeology. Strata of oil and salt and char from administrations and decades and eras of Rochester history, each one laid down invisibly, each one indistinguishable from the last. If you could core sample this grill like a glacier, you could read the history of the city in the layers, the Kodak years, the student years, the split, the pandemic, all of it, compressed into carbon, seasoned into steel. A spatula rests on the edge. The metal catches the fluorescent light and throws it back. A small flash in a room that doesn't do drama. The grill hums, not loudly, just a low, constant vibration, the sound of potential energy, of a surface that is ready to receive, ready to sizzle, ready to transform cold ingredients into hot food the same way it has for over a century. The stools are mostly empty, but not all of them. There's someone at the counter. There's always someone at the counter. Maybe it's a regular, one of the last, one of the faithful, someone who comes not because of the fame or the history or the argument, but because it's Thursday, and this is what Thursdays mean. Maybe it's a first-timer, someone who heard the name, Googled the address, drove downtown, and is about to discover what all the fuss is about. Maybe it's a ghost, not literally, but in the Rochester sense, someone who used to come every week and hasn't been in years and is back now, drawn by something they can't name, sitting on a stool that feels familiar in a way that makes them ache. The plate slides across the counter, the steam rises, and for a moment, one more moment however long it lasts, the factory is running. The product is moving. The city's oldest, strangest, most beautiful assembly line is doing what it was built to do, taking hunger and turning it into something that feels, for the duration of one meal, like belonging. That's all a plate ever was, not a trademark, not a headline, not a family wound or a legal filing or a symbol of civic decline. Just food, just a pile of hot, cheap, honest food, made fast, served without apology, eaten without pretense. The grill doesn't know it's an icon. The grill just gets hot. And somewhere in Rochester, right now, someone is hungry, and the grill is waiting. One last sizzle, then silence, then, maybe, the sound of a door opening. Every city has a factory that tells the truth. Here, it's a grill,